Hello, my dears, and welcome. Tonight, I shall spin you a tale that will surely set tongues wagging in the finest drawing rooms of London. Prepare yourselves, for the quill is poised, the inkwell brimming, and the London fog, metaphorical and perhaps soon literal, gathers in anticipation. We embark on A Waltz for the Forgotten Lady. Where best to begin than the fading gilt of Levington Manor? The afternoon sun, usually a cheerful visitor, struggled to pierce the heavy velvet drapes of what was once the drawing room of Levington Manor. Dust motes danced in the muted light, tiny, shimmering monuments to a fading grandeur. Lady Elise Levington, her slender fingers resting lightly on the cold, yellowed keys of the pianoforte, felt the chill deep in her bones, a premonition of the colder future that awaited her. The instrument itself, a venerable arad, had been the heart of her childhood, a repository of joyous scales and soaring arpeggios. Now, it stood silent, draped in a dust sheet, its polished surface dulled by neglect. It was amongst the few pieces of furniture not yet listed for sale, a small mercy granted by the creditors who had, with chilling efficiency, stripped the Baron and Baroness Levington of nearly everything. "Elise, my dear." The voice of the Baroness Levington, once lilting and full of laughter, was now a fragile echo. She stood in the doorway, her slight frame silhouetted against the gloom, a worn gown and the few jewelry left, her now regular adornment. Her eyes, still a warm hazel like Elise's own, were swollen from unshed tears. "The solicitors, they are finished. Everything is settled." The word "settled" felt like a euphemism for lost. Baron Levington, his broad shoulders stooped, entered behind her. The man who had once commanded rooms with his booming laugh and robust presence now seemed to shrink within his ill-fitting coat. "A cottage in Kent," he said, his voice raspy, "lent to us by your mother's cousins. Small, but adequate." He avoided Elise's gaze, the shame of his ruination, a palpable cloak around him. Elise turned from the silent piano, her heart aching. "Papa, Mama, please, do not despair. We have each other." She walked to them, taking a hand from each, her touch surprisingly firm. "But your future, Elise," the Baroness murmured, her voice breaking. "What of your season, your prospects?" The very thought of it, a season without a dowry, without a proper address, was laughable. "My future is secured," Elise stated, forcing a bright, unwavering tone she did not feel. "Lady Celeste Wynn has graciously offered me a position as her companion." A horrified silence descended. The Baron winced as if struck. The Baroness gasped, pressing a hand to her mouth. Lady Celeste Wynn was known throughout the ton, not merely for her formidable wealth, but for her formidable, indeed, almost monstrous disposition. She was a viper draped in silk, her sharp tongue, a weapon more lethal than any rapier. "Celeste Wynn?" the Baron finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. "But she is intolerable, Elise, a veritable gorgon." "Her temper is legendary," the Baroness added, her eyes wide with apprehension. "And her expectations quite unreasonable." Elise offered a weak smile. "She is a patron of the arts, Mamma, and she is kind enough to offer me employment when so few would." This was a lie, a necessary one. Celeste was no patron of the arts, and her kindness was as scarce as common sense at a Parliament debate. But the alternative, to remain a burden on her impoverished parents, was unthinkable. "I shall be quite fine. I am merely to assist with her correspondence and manage her household affairs, a useful occupation." "But your music, my child," the Baroness whispered, her gaze drifting to the silent pianoforte. "Your poetry, such gifts to be hidden away." Elise's fingers twitched, yearning for the touch of the keys. "My gifts are for my own solace now, Mamma. In Lady Celeste's house I shall be discreet. unseen and unheard, as Papa advised. She squeezed their hands. I shall write to you often, and perhaps one day, things will be different. The Baron sighed, a sound heavy with resignation. Be cautious, Elise. London society, it can be cruel to those who have fallen from grace. Your beauty, your spirit, they may be seen as a challenge where they should be admired. He looked at her, his love for her shining through the weariness in his eyes. Do not draw attention to yourself. Remember what we have lost, and safeguard what little dignity remains. Elise simply nodded, the full weight of their fallen fortunes pressing down on her. The silence of the empty manor echoed the silence of her own hopes. Outside, the carriage awaited, a stark reminder of her new, diminished reality. As she stepped out into the crisp autumn air, she cast one last look at Levington Manor, its windows like vacant eyes, already beginning to forget the laughter and music that had once filled its halls. The grand era of the Levingtons was over. A new, far more precarious chapter had begun. One wonders if Lady Elise had known how far into the lioness's den she was going. Would she still have ventured? The carriage, a rather plain conveyance hired at significant cost, rattled through the bustling streets of London, each jolt a stark reminder to Elise of the rigid class lines she was now crossing. From the genteel, if impoverished, comfort of Levington Manor, to the formidable threshold of Lady Celeste Wynn's Belgravia residence, it felt less like a journey and more like a descent. Lady Celeste's house was a monument to opulence, a stark contrast to the Levingtons' faded gilt. The town home stood sentinel, its grand facade exuding an air of unassailable wealth. The polished brass knocker gleamed, the intricate wrought-iron railings were flawlessly maintained, and the very air around it seemed to hum with an unspoken decree of importance. A liveried footman, his expression as impassive as a marble statue, opened the heavy oak door. He did not offer a smile, nor a word of welcome, merely gestured for Elise to enter. The cavernous hall inside swallowed her immediately, its echoing silence broken only by the soft rustle of her modest travelling gown. Light poured from a vast skylight, illuminating a grand staircase that swept upwards, guarded by a parade of stern ancestral portraits. Elise felt dwarfed, an insignificant moth within a gilded cage. Suddenly, a voice, sharp as a newly sharpened quill, sliced through the air. "Ah, Miss Levington, you have arrived." Elise turned to find Lady Celeste Wynn descending the grand staircase. Celeste was a vision of elegance, her blonde hair pulled back in a simple style that belied rather than mirrored her demeanor. Her gown, a rich cream chiffon and silk, clung to her slender figure, adorned with a dazzling array of diamonds that glittered even in the subdued light. Her eyes, the color of cold steel, surveyed Elise from head to toe, a slow, appraising glance that felt more like an inspection than a greeting. "Welcome," Celeste said, though her tone held no warmth. "I trust your journey was uneventful." "Quite so, Lady Celeste," Elise replied, curtsying deeply, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She met Celeste's gaze briefly, noting the predatory glint in those icy eyes. This woman, Elise realized, was a true lioness, and she, Elise, was merely a gazelle stepping into her lair. "Excellent. Now, let us dispense with pleasantries. I expect efficiency, discretion, and absolute loyalty. My household runs like a well-oiled machine, and you are but a new cog in its operation. Do you understand?" Celeste's voice was like cut glass, precise and unforgiving. "Yes, Lady Celeste, perfectly." "Good." Celeste reached the bottom step, her gaze raking over Elise once more. "Your duties will be considerable. You will oversee my correspondence, ensuring every social obligation is met with impeccable politeness, even if the sentiments are entirely fabricated. You will manage my wardrobe, a task requiring an eye for detail most women lack. And, crucially, you will be seen and not heard. I detest idle chatter, and I have no patience for frivolous amusements. Elise's fingers twitched, an involuntary echo of her longing for the pianoforte she had glimpsed in a distant room. Understood, Lady Celeste. One final point, Miss Levington. Celeste's gaze flickered to Elise's hands, then back to her face, a knowing smirk playing on her lips. I am aware of your former inclinations. Let me be quite clear. My pianoforte is an instrument of status, a decorative piece. It is not for a companion's idle amusements. Is that understood? A flush crept up Elise's neck, but she kept her gaze steady. Yes, Lady Celeste, entirely. Excellent. You may consider yourself instructed. Celeste turned on her heel, her silk gown rustling. My housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, will show you to your chambers. And pray, Miss Levington, try not to look so utterly forlorn. It quite spoils the atmosphere. Elise watched her ascend the stairs and then turned to Mrs. Gable, a woman with surprisingly kind eyes. This way, my lady. Mrs. Gable murmured, her voice soft, almost sympathetic. She led Elise down a narrow, dimly lit corridor that seemed to wind further and further away from the grand central hall. It was a passage to the servants' quarters, a clear demarcation of Elise's new place in the world. The small room she was shown into was clean, but stark. A single narrow bed and a small writing desk its only furnishings. A sharp contrast to the elegant chamber she had occupied at Levington Manor. As Mrs. Gable quietly left, Elise sank onto the edge of the bed. The silence of the room, broken only by the distant murmur of street sounds, seemed to press in on her. She felt like a bird with clipped wings, her music and poetry, her very essence, forced back into the deepest recesses of her heart. And so, my dearest reader, the whispers began to circulate, confirming what many already suspected. Oh, the poor Levington girl, have you heard where Celeste Wynn has lodged her? A veritable broom closet. One can only imagine the demands that woman makes. I pity Miss Levington her daily bread. Still, a roof over her head, one supposes. Beggars cannot be choosers, even if they were once barons' daughters. And so beautiful, too. Such a shame her spirit will be entirely crushed under Celeste's thumb. Elise, however, had no time for self-pity. She unpacked her few belongings, including a worn leather-bound journaler secret sanctuary for compositions and verses. Tonight, under the cloak of darkness, she would write, and perhaps, when the house truly slept, she might allow herself a single, silent melody on the hidden keyboard of her mind. For even in the lioness's den, a captive bird could still sing, if only for herself. The weeks that followed Elise's arrival at Lady Celeste Wynn's residence settled into a rhythm as precise and unyielding as a well-tuned metronome. Days were a blur of meticulously organized correspondence, overseeing the endless parade of gowns for Lady Celeste's various engagements and enduring Celeste's sharp pronouncements. Elise's small chamber, a stark contrast to the opulence of the main house, became her sanctuary. Here, under the cloak of night, she allowed her true self to emerge. The worn leather-bound journal, her most prized possession, lay open on the small writing desk. Within its pages resided the quiet melodies that bloomed in her mind and the verses that captured the unspoken yearnings of her heart. She often hummed new tunes, her voice a barely audible whisper against the muted roar of London streets. Her fingers, ever restless, would trace the patterns on the desktop, imagining the feel of ivory keys beneath them. Lady Celeste, however, was a social juggernaut, her calendar overflowing with balls, soirees, and assemblies. Elise, as her companion, was inevitably dragged along, a silent fixture in the grand parade. She learned to observe from the periphery, a keen eye for the subtle dramas unfolding amongst the ton, the fleeting smiles that masked sharp judgments, the polite conversations brimming with hidden barbs. She saw society for what it truly was, a glittering theatre where everyone played a part. One particularly stifling evening, a country ball was hosted by Lady Celeste herself at her expansive rural estate in Surrey. The air, thick with the scent of overblown roses and the cloying sweetness of potted jasmine, pressed down on the dancers. The murmur of polite conversation, punctuated by the occasional shrill laughter of ladies hoping to catch a prominent gentleman's eye, seemed to merge into a dull hum. Elise, standing dutifully behind Celeste as she held court, felt an almost physical ache for quietude. "My dear, have you ever seen such a display of ostentatious floral arrangements?" a whisper carried on the breeze of a passing fan. "One can practically drown in the scent, though Celeste does love to remind us all of her sprawling conservatories." "Indeed, Lady Eleanor, and the Duke of Hawthorn is here. Such a prize." One hopes he isn't entirely blinded by Celeste's rather forceful charm. The Duke of Hawthorn, the most honourable Frederick Langley, however, was already feeling rather blinded by sheer tedium. He had performed his requisite rounds, exchanged polite banalities with an endless parade of simpering debutantes, and endured several rather aggressive attempts at flirtation from ambitious mummers. Frederick was a man of considerable consequence, with an estate that stretched further than the eye could see, and a reputation for both impeccable manners and a certain discerning taste in the ladies. Some whispered that his heart was as well fortified as his ancestral castle. Tonight he longed for escape. He excused himself with practiced politeness, seeking the relative tranquility of a secluded balcony. The cool night air, fragrant with distant lavender, was a welcome balm. He leaned against the stone balustrade, gazing out at the moonlit gardens, the sounds of the ball a muffled, distant echo. And then he heard it, a voice, pure and ethereal, like a nightingale serenading the stars. It was singing a melody of such poignant beauty, such heartfelt longing, that it stopped him in his tracks. He peered into the shadows at the far end of the balcony, his gaze drawn to a figure silhouetted against the soft glow of the distant lanterns. It was Elise. She believed herself entirely alone. Her quiet duties at the ball were done for a few moments, and the lure of the soft moonlight had drawn her out. Her fingers, restless even in the absence of a pianoforte, lightly traced the ornate railing. She sang a folk song, a lament of forgotten love, a haunting tune imbued with a melancholy that resonated deep within Frederick's own reserved heart. Her voice, usually so restrained, flowed with unrestrained emotion, weaving a tapestry of sorrow and grace. The moonlight painted her in silver, highlighting the delicate curve of her cheek and the sorrowful cast of her eyes. Frederick remained, rooted to the spot, utterly captivated. He saw not Lady Celeste's unassuming companion, but a woman transformed by music, a creature of profound feeling. He was struck not only by her voice, but by the air of quiet dignity that clung to her, a certain refinement that spoke of a breeding far above that of a mere entertainer. He assumed her to be a visiting artist, perhaps a celebrated soprano whom Lady Celeste had, with unusual foresight, deigned to entertain. He stood there, unmoving, until the last, lingering note faded into the night. Elise sighed, a small, almost imperceptible sound of release, and then slipped back inside, unaware of the Duke's captivated presence. The next day, at a particularly lively morning call. The Ton, as was expected, had a lot to say and speculate, and it seemed the Duke, no less, was the prized subject, rather than the ball itself. My dear, the Duke of Hawthorn. He was seen lingering on the balcony for an age at Celeste Wynn's ball. Quite unlike him, you know. Indeed. Was he attempting to escape the clutches of some eager debutante? I heard Miss Davies was quite insistent. Perhaps, but he looked quite pensive, almost as if he'd heard something truly remarkable. One might even say bewitched. Bewitched, you say? Goodness, a scandalous tryst, perhaps? I do love a good scandal. Oh, I wish it was so, my dear. But no, he merely looked utterly captivated, as if by a ghost, or perhaps an angel's song. Frederick, however, was captivated not by a ghost, but by a very real, very talented woman, intrigued and utterly bewitched by the secret concert he had unwittingly stumbled upon. The Duke, upon his return to London, felt an unfamiliar urgency. He resolved to seek out the mysterious Miss Elise. He would pen letters, discreetly, of course, to the address of Lady Celeste Wynn. He imagined her delight at finding a kindred spirit, a fellow admirer of beauty and intellect, one who understood the profound power of music. Little did he know the tangled, venomous web he was about to step into. The Duke of Hawthorn, a man of methodical habits and discerning taste, penned his first letter to Miss Elise with an unusual sense of anticipation. He chose the finest vellum, his script elegant and precise. He spoke of the profound beauty of the music he had heard, not mentioning the voice, but rather the melody as if it were a piece performed. He expressed a desire for intellectual discourse, for a shared appreciation of the arts, hoping to draw out the mysterious artist he believed Elise to be. He sealed the letter with his crest and dispatched it to Lady Celeste Wynn's London residence, convinced it would find its rightful recipient. The very next morning, the Duke's letter, bearing his distinct seal, arrived with the morning post. It was placed on the silver tray presented by the footman, amidst Celeste's other social invitations and bills. Lady Celeste Wynn, sipping her perfectly steeped tea, paused when her gaze fell upon the familiar crest. A flicker of surprise crossed her sharp features, quickly replaced by a slow, calculating smile. Her fingers, adorned with glittering rings, plucked the letter from the tray. She turned it over, noting the elegant hand, the address to Miss Elise. Her maid, Miss Higgins, a timid woman who always seemed on the verge of disappearing entirely, stood by. "Is there anything else, Lady Celeste?" Celeste's eyes, cold as glaciers, lingered on the letter. "No, Higgins, you may attend to your duties." She dismissed the maid with a wave of her hand, then proceeded to her private study, the letter clutched tightly. Once behind the locked doors, Celeste's smile tightened into a predatory smirk. "Miss Elise," she murmured, a sneer in her voice. "Such insolence, to attract the Duke's notice beneath my very roof." She carefully broke the seal, her long nail leaving a tiny, almost invisible scratch near the wax, a secret sign that it had been inspected. She unfolded the vellum and read Frederick's elegant words. Her eyes narrowed. He speaks of music, of discourse, of beauty. A plan, swift and wicked, began to form in her astute, albeit cruel, mind. She approached Elise an hour later, holding the letter with an air of casual indifference. Elise was at her writing desk, meticulously cataloguing Celeste's numerous charitable donations. "Elise," Celeste called out, her voice unusually sweet, a sugar coating over poison. "A curious missive arrived for you. It seems the Duke of Hawthorn has taken an interest in your singing, I presume?" She held the letter up, allowing Elise to glimpse the Duke's crest. Elise's heart leaped, then plummeted. Her face flushed, a mixture of profound surprise and cold dread. How could he have heard, and why would he write to me? My singing, Lady Celeste? I did not know anyone heard me. Celeste's smile tightened, a flash of malice in her eyes. Indeed, it seems your little artistic endeavors have not gone unnoticed. However, I must confess, the Duke is a man of considerable standing. One must be discreet. One would not wish to be mistaken for an opportunist. She then deliberately handed Elise the letter, allowing Elise to see the subtle scratch near the broken seal, a small yet chilling testament to Celeste's intrusion. Elise opened the letter with trembling fingers. Frederick's words were kind, filled with genuine admiration for the melody she had sung and the beauty of music. He spoke of music as a balm for the soul, and expressed a hope for further discourse. A spark of hope, fragile but insistent, ignited within Elise's desolate heart. Perhaps he saw something in me beyond my station. She penned a reply that very evening, her words flowing with genuine gratitude and a cautious eagerness to discuss the music she loved so dearly. She left it on the hall table for the morning post. But Celeste, ever vigilant, ever scheming, had noted the original delivery date of the Duke's letter and the typical time Elise would leave her reply. She intercepted Elise's sincere response before it could reach the Duke's hands. She then, with unsettling accuracy, mimicked Elise's delicate script, but with a subtly more flamboyant flourish, adding a dash of artifice. "My dearest Duke," Celeste penned, her lips curling into a satisfied smile. "Your words are as intoxicating as the finest champagne. Indeed, I find myself quite delighted by your attention. Perhaps we might explore more than mere discourse. Might we not? My evenings are often rather dull, and I eagerly await your next missive, perhaps even a personal call." She replaced Elise's genuine letter with her own cunning fabrication, carefully sealed it, and had it dispatched to the Duke. And so the cruel game began. A stream of letters flowed between the Duke's residence and Celeste Wynn's, each a masterpiece of deceit. Elise, receiving the Duke's subsequent letters, each filled with increasingly confused attempts to reconcile the Miss Elise he read in the letters with the demure, almost hesitant companion he occasionally glimpsed, would reply with heartfelt, innocent sincerity. Celeste, in turn, would intercept these, replacing them with forged replies that painted Elise as manipulative, overly forward, and brazenly eager to ensnare a wealthy husband. The whispers amongst the ton, fueled by subtle hints dropped by Celeste herself, began to take a decidedly cynical turn. One hears that the Duke of Hawthorn is quite taken with Celeste Wynn's companion. Quite scandalous, isn't it? Oh, not scandalous, Lady Beatrice. Merely unseemly. The girl is clearly attempting to climb above her station. One hears her letters are quite forward, rather brazen for a companion. And the Duke, bless his heart, seems utterly bewildered by it all. He appears quite distracted, almost perturbed, at social gatherings. Celeste must be furious to have her own companion trying to steal her thunder. Ah, but Celeste is a clever one. She'll put a stop to it, I wager. She's not one to suffer such impudence for long. Elise, meanwhile, wondered at the Duke's increasingly distant tone in his letters. Had she somehow offended him? Did he find her words too dull, too earnest, too devoid of the witty banter society seemed to demand? The lack of genuine connection stung, a cold knot in her stomach, but she bore it with her usual quiet fortitude, pouring her unspoken emotions into her music and poetry, ever more secretly. She clutched her journal closer each night, its pages filled with the true words she wished to send, words of truth and genuine admiration, trapped within her silent world. The Duke's increasingly perplexing correspondence was not the only shadow lengthening over Elise's quiet existence. One brisk autumn afternoon, Lady Celeste, in a rare fit of domesticity, decided her music room needed an immediate and thorough tidying. She summoned Elise. "Elise!" Celeste commanded, her voice ringing with the artificial cheer she often adopted when she was about to be particularly demanding. "The music room is a veritable disaster. I require your assistance in organizing the scores. Ensure they are alphabetized and that any extraneous materials are discarded." Elise suppressed a sigh. Celeste's music room was less a place of melodic creation and more a monument to her unplayed compositions and fashionable, yet untouched, instruments. Elise entered the room, the grand pianoforte standing like a silent, imposing sentinel in the center. Its highly polished surface reflected the muted light, a constant, tantalizing invitation. As she sorted through stacks of sheet music, mostly amateur compositions from Celeste's own youth or fashionable vapid tunes, her gaze fell upon a blank piece of staff paper near the pianoforte. A sudden inspiration, a melody that had been haunting her thoughts for days, pulsed within her. It was a waltz, born of longing and lost dreams, a piece that held a fragment of her very soul. It was her most cherished composition, a melody she hummed to herself when the world felt too heavy, too cruel. Unthinking, consumed by the urgency of the nascent notes, Elise picked up the paper and a quill. She quickly jotted down the opening bars, the main theme of the waltz, her fingers moving swiftly, instinctively. She worked for perhaps 10 minutes, lost in the intricate beauty of the unfolding melody, completely forgetting her surroundings. "Lady Celeste," Mrs. Gable's voice, hushed and urgent, came from the hallway. "Miss Davies is here for her dress fitting, and she insists on being seen immediately." "Confound it!" Celeste's voice snapped from her study nearby. "Very well, I shall be there directly." Elise, startled, quickly capped her quill. She had only just finished the core melody, the heart of the waltz. She glanced at the door, then back at the half-finished score. Her hands trembled slightly. She couldn't take it back to her room without risking being seen carrying it by Celeste or one of the gossiping maids. In a moment of hurried panic, she slipped the score beneath a stack of other sheet music on the pianoforte itself, intending to retrieve it the moment she was free. "Elise, are you finished with that music? I need you to attend to Miss Davies's laces immediately." Celeste's voice, sharp with impatience, cut through the air. "Coming, Lady Celeste," Elise called, rushing out of the room, leaving her precious waltz hidden amongst the other, far less significant, compositions. Celeste, however, had merely feigned urgency. Her ears, sharp as a fox's, had caught the faint scratching of a quill, the soft murmur of Elise's humming before Mrs. Gable's interruption. After Elise rushed out, Celeste lingered for a moment. Then, with a subtle smirk, she slipped into the music room. Her eyes, accustomed to seeking out hidden things, immediately noticed the slightly displaced stack of music. Her hand reached out, plucking Elise's handwritten score from its hiding place. She scanned the elegant notation, her brow furrowing slightly. It was unlike the simple tunes she usually encountered. This had depth, a haunting quality. A slow, calculating smile spread across her lips. Recognizing its haunting beauty, and devoid of any shred of conscience, she saw not a work of art, but an opportunity. Miss Evangeline Dubois, her rather talentless but undeniably well-connected cousin, was desperate for a new piece for her upcoming performance at the Royal Gala. This, Celeste surmised, would do beautifully. "My dear Elise," Celeste purred to herself, holding the sheet music delicately. "You continue to surprise me, but not in the way you intend." The anticipation for the Royal Gala was a palpable hum throughout London. It was the social event of the season, a glittering spectacle where the ton would gather, not merely to dance and converse, but to see and be seen, to judge and be judged. For Lady Celeste Wynn, it was an opportunity for triumph, and for Elise, an evening of quiet dread. The grandeur of the royal ballroom was breathtaking. Chandeliers, blazing with thousands of candles, cast a golden glow over shimmering gowns of silk and satin, and the air was thick with the perfume of 1,000 hothouse flowers. The orchestra played a lively quadrille, its melodies washing over the excited murmurs of the assembled guests. Lady Celeste Wynn, resplendent in a beaded gown with uncountable pearls and gold threads, moved through the throng like a queen, her arm linked with that of her cousin, Miss Evangeline Dubois. Evangeline, a beautiful young woman of stunning beauty, was dressed in a fitted emerald gown that further flattered and drew more attention to her. Tonight, she was to be presented as a burgeoning musical talent. "My dear, have you seen Miss Dubois' gown? So French. While the shade is agreeable, one still detects Lady Celeste's hand in the attire to garner attention. Poor French girl. It must be peculiar to be sent here by her affluent parents, and to be guided by none other than Celeste. Tonight is her big night, they say. A debut composition. A debut? How thrilling! Though one has heard Miss Dubois' talents are more suited to needlepoint than the pianoforte. Shush you! Celeste will hear, and then her icy glare will turn you into a pillar of salt." Celeste, basking in the glow of pre-performance attention, led Evangeline to the grand pianoforte placed prominently on a raised dais. A hush began to fall over the crowd as Frederick, the Duke of Hawthorn, ever the epitome of grace, bowed to the Queen. His gaze, however, seemed to drift towards the dais, a subtle frown marring his perfect features. He was still puzzled by the inconsistencies in the letters and the distant, almost wary glances Elise, his supposed Miss Elise, cast in his direction. Celeste smiled, a brilliant, insincere flash of teeth. "Your Majesty, esteemed guests," she announced, her voice carrying across the ballroom with practiced ease. "It is with immense pride that I present my dear cousin, Miss Evangeline Dubois, who has composed a most enchanting waltz, a true triumph, I assure you, and a testament to her burgeoning genius." Evangeline, a reluctant smile on her face, curtsied clumsily to the applause and settled herself at the pianoforte. She took a deep breath, her fingers poised nervously, and then she began to play. It was Elise's waltz. Every note, every nuance, was a painful echo in Elise's ears. She stood amongst Celeste's retinue, pressed into the shadows near a potted palm, her heart a cold, leaden weight in her chest. The melody, which had flowed from her soul in a moment of private sorrow, was now being paraded, cheapened by a false attribution. She watched, a silent scream trapped in her throat, as Evangeline, with only passable skill, played the notes that were so intimately hers. The applause was thunderous when Evangeline finished, the accolades effusive. The Queen herself expressed admiration for the composer's talent. "Such a beautiful melody, Miss Dubois," Her Majesty declared, nodding graciously. "It speaks of a truly sensitive soul. We shall look forward to hearing more of your compositions." Elise felt a wave of nausea. Her secret offering, her heartfelt creation, had been stolen and paraded before the world, attributed to a fraud. She clenched her fists, her nails digging into her palms, a desperate, impotent rage bubbling beneath her carefully composed facade. The injustice was a bitter taste in her mouth, a cruel mockery of her forgotten dignity. She risked a glance at Frederick, the Duke, who was now engaged in polite conversation with the Queen, but his gaze still held that subtle frown, that perplexing shadow. Does he recognize it? Does he know? She wondered, a flicker of desperate hope. But he did not. He merely looked thoughtful. The gossips, my dears, were already dissecting the performance, their whispers sharp and knowing. "Did you hear that waltz? Simply divine." Who knew Miss Dubois had such a talent? Though, I must confess, it felt familiar. Familiar, you say? Perhaps she borrowed a few bars from another piece, darling. It happens. Nonsense, Lady Margaret. Celeste would never allow such a thing. And besides, one could almost hear the suffering in the notes. Perhaps a secret admirer gave her the inspiration? One shudders to think. Still, the Queen was quite impressed. That guarantees Miss Dubois a place in society, and Celeste's influence will only grow. And the Levington girl, standing there like a statue. One wonders if she even felt the beauty of the piece. Such a vapid creature, I'm sure. Emboldened by this success, and sensing the Duke's continued, albeit confused, attention fueled by her forged letters, Lady Celeste decided to play her final hand. She orchestrated a series of carefully staged encounters with Frederick throughout the evening, fluttering her eyelashes and dropping veiled hints about her admirer and her delight in their growing connection. "Oh, Your Grace," Celeste would purr, adjusting a lace cuff with an air of delicate shyness that fooled no one. "You are too kind to send such charming sentiments. One almost feels pursued. Though, I confess, I find myself quite enjoying the chase." This, while shooting a triumphant, venomous glance at Elise, who stood dutifully behind her, a mere ghost amidst the glittering throng. Frederick, though still perplexed by the discrepancy between the woman in the letters and the calculating creature before him, found himself succumbing to the relentless pressure of society and Celeste's skillful manipulations. He was a man of honor, and he believed he had engaged in a meaningful correspondence with Celeste. The woman before him, though at times jarringly different, was the one who claimed to have penned those captivating words. He observed Elise, noting her quiet grace, a stark contrast to Celeste's vibrant, almost aggressive, charm. A seed of doubt, tiny but persistent, began to take root in his mind. Why does Miss Elise avoid my gaze? Why does she appear so mournful when her letters are so spirited? But he dismissed it, for the social machinery was already turning. The grand ball was a blur of forced smiles and stifled yawns for the Duke of Hawthorn. He had spent the latter part of the evening cornered by Lady Celeste, whose conversational prowess was only matched by her uncanny ability to steer every topic back to his own illustrious lineage and the numerous advantages of an alliance with her. He observed Elise, standing a respectful distance behind Celeste, a shadow against the vibrant tapestry of the tun. She seemed to shrink from his gaze, her eyes, when they briefly met his, filled with a deep, inexplicable sadness. It was a stark contrast to the lively, even coquettish, persona projected in the letters he received daily. His betrothal to Lady Celeste Wynn, announced with such fanfare in the morning gazettes, felt increasingly hollow. The woman beside him, radiating triumph and calculating satisfaction, bore little resemblance to the insightful, artistically inclined spirit whose correspondence had so intrigued him. The discrepancies gnawed at him, a persistent burr under his saddle. "Such a splendid match, Your Grace," Lady Harrington gushed, her smile wide enough to swallow a small canary. "Lady Celeste will make a truly admirable Duchess, so practical." "Indeed, Lady Harrington," Frederick replied, his gaze drifting towards Elise. "Practicality is a virtue, to be sure." His tone, however, suggested he might have preferred a dash more poetry. Later that evening, as he endured a rather tedious discussion about the proper pruning of rose bushes with a particularly opinionated baron, Frederick found his thoughts straying back to the balcony at Celeste's country estate. The moonlight, the soft rustle of silk, and the voice, the haunting, pure voice. It had been Elise. He remembered now the companion discreetly moving about in the background. But the letters. They had never mentioned Celeste's companion. The next morning, his brow furrowed in thought, Frederick reread the stack of letters from Miss Elise. One, in particular, spoke of a particular passage from a Beethoven sonata, lamenting how its melancholic beauty was often lost in too grand a performance. Another contained a delicate poem about resilience, signed simply E. He then pulled out several of Celeste's more recent social notes, hand, undeniably elegant, but lacking the subtle flourishes and unique turn of phrase he had come to associate with his unseen correspondent. A chill traced its way down his spine. The realization, cold and unwelcome, began to solidify. He dispatched a discreet message to Lady Celeste, requesting a private audience with her, and, specifically, with her companion, Miss Elise. He feigned an interest in discussing the musical arrangements for a forthcoming charity concert, knowing Celeste would never refuse an opportunity to showcase her connections. Celeste received him in her morning room, a space usually reserved for intimate confidences, yet it felt colder than a ballroom on a winter's night. She was draped in a silk peignoir, an aura of complacent victory about her. "Your Grace," Celeste exclaimed, her smile practiced, her voice overly bright. "Such an early call. To what do I owe this delightful surprise?" She made a show of smoothing her perfectly coiffed hair. "Lady Celeste," Frederick began, his voice calm, yet with an underlying current of intensity that only those truly attuned to his character would notice. "I trust I am not disturbing you. I had a matter of some delicacy to discuss regarding the upcoming Royal Charity Concert, and I confess I was hoping to consult with your companion, Miss Elise, on a particular point of musicality. I believe she has quite the discerning ear." Celeste's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered. "Miss Levington? Why, of course, Your Grace. She is, as you say, quite discerning. Though her talents are more suited to domestic arrangements, I assure you." She clapped her hands. "Elise, come forward, my dear. The Duke wishes to offer you his compliments." Elise, pale but resolute, entered the room, her gaze fixed on the Persian rug. She curtsied deeply, keeping her eyes averted. The air in the room seemed to crackle with unspoken tension. "Miss Elise," Frederick began, his voice gentle but firm, "I trust you are well. I have, as you know, enjoyed our correspondence immensely. Your observations on the subtle nuances of music, for instance, are quite profound. Do you recall, in your letter of the 10th, you mentioned a particular passage from a Beethoven sonata, a minor key, was it not, that spoke of a wistful yearning?" He watched her carefully, his gaze unwavering. Celeste, standing beside him, began to interject, a nervous laugh escaping her lips. "Oh, Your Grace, Elise is simply too modest. She has quite the ear, don't you, dear? Though Beethoven, I confess, is rather too robust for my delicate sensibilities. We prefer lighter airs here, don't we, Elise?" Frederick held up a hand, his gaze still fixed on Elise. "I was asking Miss Elise." Elise's heart hammered against her ribs. She sensed a flicker of something in the Duke's eyes, doubt perhaps, or a desperate hope. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but clear. "Yes, Your Grace, the Pathétique Sonata, second movement. It is often performed with a certain grandeur, but I find its true beauty lies in the quiet, almost hesitant phrasing of its central theme. A wistful yearning indeed, a deep, quiet sorrow that only a truly sensitive soul can discern." Frederick nodded slowly, a dawning realization in his eyes. Celeste's forged letter had, in fact, brushed off the Beethoven reference with a generic, overly enthusiastic comment about all grand music. He pressed on, his voice a low, insistent hum. "And the poem you enclosed in your second letter, Miss Elise, the one about the resilience of the rose in winter, it was quite moving. The line, 'Though thorns may prick and petals fall, the root holds firm and conquers all.' Do you recall composing that?" Elise's eyes widened slightly, her gaze darting to Celeste, who had gone rigid beside Frederick, a faint flush creeping up her neck, her hands clenching into fists. The words, the very rhythm of the poem, were hers, a private solace she had penned in her journal. She had never sent it to the Duke. "Your Grace," Elise began, her voice gaining strength despite the tremor in her hands. I did write such a poem, yes. It was a personal reflection, never intended for wider circulation." She then paused, gathering every ounce of courage she possessed. "And as for our correspondence, Your Grace, I fear there has been a grave misunderstanding. I have received your letters, and I have replied with all the sincerity of my heart. But the sentiments expressed in your replies, the Duke's replies to me, I believe, were not my own." Celeste's eyes blazed with fury. "What utter nonsense, Elise! You are distraught. The Duke is merely testing your literary memory. This is a grave impertinence, Your Grace, to suggest such a thing." Her voice was shrill, desperate, entirely unconvincing. Frederick ignored her, his gaze unwavering on Elise. "And the waltz, Miss Elise, the one performed by Miss Dubois at the Royal Gala, was that your composition?" Elise met his gaze, tears welling in her eyes, but her voice was firm, resonant with the truth she had guarded for so long. "Yes, Your Grace, it was." A single tear escaped, tracing a path down her cheek. "I composed it in my chamber. It was stolen." Celeste lunged forward, her hand raised. "You liar, you insolent wretch, how dare you?" Frederick intercepted her, his hand firmly gripping her wrist. His gaze, once merely puzzled, was now cold steel. "That is quite enough, Lady Celeste," he said, his voice quiet, yet more chilling than any shout. "The truth, it seems, has a most inconvenient way of revealing itself." Without another word to Celeste, who stood sputtering and turning a mottled red, her face a mask of thwarted malice, Frederick turned, his eyes holding Elise's, a silent promise in their depths. He bowed curtly to Celeste, then strode from the room, leaving her to grapple with the crumbling edifice of her lies. He knew what he had to do. He would not stand idly by while such injustice prevailed. The woman he had admired from afar, the voice that had haunted his dreams, had been cruelly manipulated and silenced, and he, unwittingly, had been a part of her torment. The very next society gathering saw a scene of unprecedented drama, a spectacle that would be recounted in hushed tones and delighted gasps for decades to come. It was the annual spring soirée at the venerable Lady Albright's townhouse, a gathering of the Ton's most influential and therefore most gossipy members. The ballroom glittered with more than just candlelight. It shimmered with anticipation, for the air had been thick with rumors since the Duke of Hawthorn's abrupt departure from Lady Celeste Wynn's residence. Lady Celeste, however, had arrived with a facade of unwavering composure, her chin held high. She moved through the room with a practiced air of triumph, accepting congratulations on her impending nuptials as if no storm brewed on the horizon. She had already spun her version of the morning's events, hinting at Elise's mental distress and the Duke's misguided compassion. "Celeste looks quite radiant, does she not?" chirped a younger debutante, quite oblivious. "Radiant with victory, my dear," an older lady sniffed, fanning herself slowly, "though one wonders about the rumor of her companion's outburst this morning. Oh, that girl, always causing trouble, I hear, clearly distraught by the Duke's choice of a respectable bride." Just as Celeste was holding court near the grand staircase, accepting a glass of champagne with a gloved hand, the murmurs in the ballroom began to swell, then abruptly hushed. All eyes turned to the entrance. The Duke of Hawthorn entered. His presence alone commanded attention, but tonight his countenance was unusually serious, his jaw set with a quiet determination, and at his side, looking impossibly fragile, yet holding herself with a newfound strength, was Lady Elise Levington. She wore a simple sky-blue gown, but it served only to highlight her delicate beauty and the luminous defiance in her eyes. The sheer audacity of her presence, escorted by the Duke himself, sent a ripple of shocked whispers through the room. Frederick, his posture straight, his gaze unwavering, made his way directly to where Celeste stood, a small, resolute figure at his side. The assembled guests parted before him, leaving a path of stunned silence. Celeste's eyes, usually so sharp, widened in dawning horror as she saw Elise by his side. Her practiced smile froze, then slowly melted into a ghastly grimace. "My lords, ladies, and gentlemen," Frederick began, his voice clear and commanding, resonating throughout the stunned silence of the ballroom. Every eye was fixed upon him, every ear strained to catch his words. "I regret to announce that my engagement to Lady Celeste Wynn has been terminated, effective immediately." A collective gasp swept through the room, followed by a flurry of frantic whispers like startled birds. Celeste, her face frozen in a mask of shock, began to stammer, "Your Grace, what is the meaning of this? You cannot." Frederick's gaze, colder than any winter's night, cut her off. "I can, Lady Celeste, and I shall. It has come to my attention that Lady Celeste Wynn has engaged in a most heinous deception. She has intercepted and forged correspondence, leading me to believe I was communicating with a woman of a certain character, when in fact the true author of those captivating letters stands beside me now." He turned, his hand gently resting on Elise's arm, presenting her to the shocked assembly. "Lady Elise Levington." More gasps, louder this time. Eyes darted between Celeste and Elise, then back to the Duke. "Lady Elise," Frederick continued, his voice now imbued with a quiet reverence, "through her own honesty and courage, has revealed the full extent of this treachery. She is, in fact, the true composer of the waltz performed at the Royal Gala by Miss Dubois, a piece unjustly claimed and performed under false pretenses." He then held aloft a small, elegant, leather-bound journal, Elise's precious sanctuary. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is Lady Elise's personal journal, where she has meticulously recorded her compositions and her private reflections, including every word of the true letters she sent to me, and the original manuscript of the waltz. The hand is undeniably hers, and the sentiments incomparable to the deceitful missives I received from Lady Celeste." He opened it, allowing a few pages to fan open, displaying Elise's elegant script. Lady Celeste's face, moments before flushed with victory, now paled to a ghostly white, her lips trembling. Her protests were weak, a strangled sound in her throat, her denials unconvincing against the weight of Frederick's calm and measured accusations and the undeniable evidence in his hand. She looked like a trapped animal, her desperate eyes darting around the room, seeking an escape where there was none. The gossips, my dears, were in a frenzy the likes of which London had never seen. Their fans snapped shut, their mouths agape. Good heavens, a scandal of epic proportions! I might actually faint. Celeste Wynn, the audacity to forge letters and steal a composition, the very nerve. And the Duke, so noble, so honorable, to stand up for that poor, downtrodden girl. Who would have imagined? Who knew the Levington girl had such talent and such character to face Celeste like that? Oh, the shame, Celeste will be ruined, utterly ruined. Her name will be mud. And to think Miss Dubois received the Queen's praise for a stolen waltz. What a humiliation for the entire family. The betrothal was broken, publicly and irrevocably. Society, ever fickle, ever hungry for drama, turned its collective back on the disgraced Lady Celeste. The whispers now painting her not as a clever strategist, but as a desperate and deceitful woman. She retreated from the Lady Albright's soiree, a solitary, humiliated figure, her name now a byword for treachery. The very air seemed to shun her presence. Her reign was over. In the aftermath of the scandalous exposé, the Ton, with its insatiable appetite for novelty, turned its attention swiftly from the disgraced Lady Celeste to the remarkable Lady Elise. The change in the wind was palpable, almost dizzying in its speed. The same voices that had once whispered of her fallen fortunes now sang praises of her courage and talent. Frederick, the Duke of Hawthorn, ever a man of action, ensured that Elise's name was not only cleared but celebrated. He arranged for her to play her waltz, a waltz for the forgotten lady, at the next grand musical soirée hosted by the Royal Society of Music. The performance was not just a concert, it was an act of reclamation, a public vindication. The evening of the performance arrived, and the hallowed halls of the Society of Music buzzed with an excited throng. Elise, no longer in her simple grey, but in a gown of shimmering blue silk, donated by a now chastened Lady Albright, who sought to redeem her own social standing, stood before the grand pianoforte. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from a profound sense of purpose. Frederick stood beside her, his hand briefly covering hers on the keys, a silent gesture of unwavering support. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frederick announced, his voice carrying the full weight of his authority, "tonight, we are privileged to hear a truly original composition, a melody of profound beauty, performed by its rightful and brilliant composer, Lady Elise Levington." He then stepped back, allowing her the spotlight she deserved. Elise began to play. Her fingers, no longer hesitant, danced across the keys. The waltz, born of her deepest sorrow and most resilient hope, filled the room. Every note was imbued with the emotion of her journey, the quiet dignity of her parents' decline, the crushing weight of Celeste's cruelty, the surprising glimmer of connection in the Duke's letters, and the searing injustice of the stolen melody. The music swelled, a testament to her forgotten beauty, her suppressed voice finally unfurling for the world to hear. Tears pricked the eyes of many a seasoned socialite. Even the most cynical members of the Ton were moved by the raw honesty and exquisite beauty of the piece. When the final note faded, silence hung in the air, a respectful, awe-struck quietude before erupting into thunderous applause. It was not mere polite clapping. It was a roar of genuine appreciation, a collective apology, and a heartfelt welcome. Elise rose, her eyes shimmering with tears, her heart overflowing. She curtsied deeply, accepting the accolades, not for the gown or the diamonds, but for the music that was truly, undeniably hers. Frederick stepped forward, his eyes, warm and filled with admiration, meeting hers. He offered his arm, and together they received the acclaim of a society that had, finally, seen the truth. The next day, the London papers, abandoning their usual veiled pronouncements, reported with unabashed enthusiasm, "A star is reborn. Lady Elise Levington captivates the Ton with her original waltz. The true composer revealed, justice for the forgotten lady. Duke of Hawthorn champions virtue and talent, a most noble alliance. Celeste Wynn's reign of deceit ends in public humiliation." In the weeks that followed, the whispers shifted. They spoke of the Duke's unwavering admiration for Elise, not just for her talent, but for her quiet strength and intrinsic goodness. They spoke of the grace with which she handled her newfound popularity, never boasting, always humble, yet radiating a quiet confidence. Frederick, now freed from his erroneous engagement, courted Elise openly and honorably. There were no more intercepted letters, only genuine exchanges, filled with shared laughter and growing affection. He learned of her true passions, her dreams, and her unwavering loyalty to her family. She, in turn, discovered his deep well of kindness, his sharp intellect, and the genuine warmth hidden beneath his reserved exterior. He often sought her counsel on musical matters, or on matters of literature, genuinely valuing her insights. He brought her books, not just fashionable novels, but treatises on philosophy and volumes of poetry, delighting in their shared intellectual pursuits. One crisp afternoon, in the quiet intimacy of Frederick's private gardens, beneath an ancient oak tree, he knelt. "Elise," he said, his voice soft, yet resonating with deep emotion. "My dearest Elise, you are the truest, most beautiful soul I have ever known. Your music revealed your heart to me, and your strength has captivated mine. Will you do me the honor of becoming my Duchess? Will you allow me to spend the rest of my days listening to the true melodies of your heart?" Elise's eyes, bright with unshed tears of joy, met his. "Yes, Frederick," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet filled with an unwavering certainty. 1,000 times, yes. The quiet dignity of Levington Manor was a distant memory. Elise had not only reclaimed her name and her art, but she had found a love rooted in truth, respect, and mutual admiration. Their union was not merely a convenient match of titles and fortunes, but a joining of hearts, forged in adversity, bound by integrity, and serenaded by the triumphant notes of a waltz that would never again be forgotten. And so concludes our tale of A Waltz for the Forgotten Lady. If you enjoyed this journey through the ballrooms and betrayals of Regency London, be sure to subscribe for more captivating stories and delightful diversions from the Chronicles of the Ton. We have many more secrets to reveal and many more hearts to win.